Operant conditioning is a theory of how we learn within the learning approach. You need to be able to describe operant conditioning and be warned and aware that you need to be able to know at least kind of 4 or 5 points on this nice and clearly for AO1. You need to be able to discuss research that supports operant conditioning and use that research to evaluate strengths and weaknesses of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning itself is learning through consequences, and I absolutely advise you to remember that sentence. It's the idea that we're relating to voluntary behaviour, so it's not a reflex, it's it's something that you're choosing to do. And it's the idea that you are producing voluntary behaviour before it can be conditioned. So what we're saying is you have to do something because you're learning from the response of doing it. So the idea is when people behave in a particular way, they're rewarded for it, then they're going to get repeated. And if they're punished for it, then they're going to stop it. This makes perfect sense when you think about child rearing practices. When a child does something good, you're going to give them a sweet or some praise. And if they don't do something good, they might go on the naughty step. Aspects of conditioning then, it's this idea of learning through consequences. Now we've got positive reinforcers, so this idea if you do something good, I'm going to give you something nice, you're more likely to repeat that behaviour. So again, with an animal research, they're going to press a lever if it responds to food. If they learn that, then they're going to press that lever again because they want the food as the reward. Now within this you can have primary reinforcers or secondary reinforcers. So a primary reinforcer is something that is required to survive. So a primary reinforcer might be food, it might be the ability to go to sleep, anything like that. Whereas a secondary reinforcer might just be something more that we want. So it might be a trip to the seaside or a bucket and spade or something like that. A negative reinforcer, please be careful here, there is a really common misconception. A negative reinforcer is when something that they don't like is taken away from them in order to ensure that desirable behaviour is repeated. So for example, you've worked really hard today, I'm really proud of you, you don't have to wash the dishes, I will do it, you go and play on the Xbox. So by saying you don't have to wash the dishes, I've removed something that you didn't want to do as a positive reinforcer for you. So as something, something nice for you so that you're more likely to do it. You've worked hard in your psychology lesson today, so you don't have any homework. That's a negative reinforcement. Punishment, we don't really use punishment as much anymore. You need to talk about it in your exam, but it's much more widely accepted that punishment isn't actually as effective anymore. But punishment is where you've done an undesirable behaviour that I don't want you to repeat, so I'm doing something unpleasant to you to stop that behaviour. So for example, you're having a tantrum, you're being naughty, you might get a smack bum, or you're naughty in lesson, so you're going to get a punishment, and that is a detention to do it. And it's very important here that you understand that this is to stop an undesirable behaviour. As I mentioned, it's not normally recommended, and if this is the only attention that a person gets, then the punishment can actually be reinforcing. Think about deprived children or particularly naughty children. Often it's understood that if the only time they get any sort of attention or interaction with their parents is when they're being naughty, then actually they learn that they want the attention, so they repeat the behaviour anyway. You also need to know about the frequency of reinforcement and how important that is in terms of making sure that behaviour is repeated. We specifically call this schedules of reinforcement. So this is how often you do it, basically. How often you do it determines how often or how quickly the behaviour will be learnt to be repeated and how often we can expect that behaviour to be seen. There is still an acceptance here that extinction can happen, so if you're not reinforcing it, it will gradually die out. So if you're not saying well done to your child every third time that they do their homework, if you just stop doing it, then actually they're going to stop learning that that's a positive behaviour and they're going to stop doing it. So this is probably the most important slide that you're going to see. Everything on the board here is a schedule of reinforcement. They're all underlined. You need to know exactly what these are, so the key words, but also you need to be able to explain them. 2017 AS paper, this was a question and you had to be able to name the schedules of reinforcement and explain what they were. The first one is continuous reinforcement. That basically means that you are rewarding the behaviour every time it occurs. So every time you do your homework, I'm going to give you a sweet. And the great thing with this is it creates the strongest association, and it means that the association is learnt the quickest. The rest of them, the biggest tip I will give you is to please remember that an interval refers to a period of time. So if you've got a fixed interval, this means I'm going to reward your behaviour every 3 hours, or I'm going to reward your behaviour every Monday, or the first of every month. So it means that every single time a specific amount of time has passed, that's when you reinforce the behaviour. Equally, number 3, interval means time and variable means change. So it's after a changed amount of time, an unpredictable amount of time. So I might give you a reward every time that you do your homework after 3 hours, and then 6 hours, and then 9 hours, and then 1 hour, and then 5 hours. So it's a totally unpredictable amount of time. 4 and 5 here are ratios, and please remember that ratio refers to number. So for example, when you're talking about a variable ratio, it means a change in number of times. So the first time you do your homework, the 7th time you do your homework, the 8th time you do your homework, the 11th time you do your homework, it's random. Whereas a fixed ratio is a fixed number. So I'm going to give you a sweet every 3rd time you do your homework. You also need to know about flexibility. So for example, you can have shaping behaviour. Now in lesson I will have shown you the video of the squirrel on the assault course, so please try and remember that. So it's this idea that you can't just wait for somebody to do an entire assault course before you reward their behaviour, otherwise it's not going to work. So actually what you get them to do is to do a little bit of that behaviour and then reward them, and then a little bit more of that behaviour and then reward them, getting them to start from the beginning each time so that you're building up a longer desired response. Discrimination, this is very similar to what we were talking about with classical conditioning. It's the ability to tell the difference apart. So I know I'm going to get a reward every time that I do my homework, but I might not get a reward every time I learn my spellings. So it's the difference between them, and you know which one gives a reinforcer and which one doesn't. Whereas equally, generalisation is the exact opposite. So I expect to get a reward every time I do my homework, and every time I learn my spellings, and every time I do a project. I would advise you to pause now and have a little look and a little go at this exam question. It was from an AS exam paper. It's an AO2 question, but you're using the principles of operant conditioning to explain how the teacher can modify Sally's behaviour. The next slide I'm going to show you is the mark scheme. So note here that every single awarded point is an AO2 answer. If you're not talking about Sally and the teacher in the context of a school, you're not going to get any marks at all. Your first point is for trying to talk about this idea of operant conditioning, so saying what a positive reinforcer is or a negative, and then applying that to the situation and saying how this could be used for Sally and the teacher.